Welcome to day 3 of Automation Testing Bootcamp. Today's session is CSS-Path Masterclass. So with this session, we're going to learn what is CSS-Path, how to write CSS-Path, what are different operators involved, what are the different ways of writing a CSS-Path. I have already explained how developers use the attributes within these HTML tags to apply styling using CSS. If required, please refer to the day 1 session where I have discussed about that topic. Let's start with some examples. So let us try to reach, let's say we want to reach to this drop down, right? Let's inspect this first. Here we can see we have a tag select and these attributes, right? Let's try to write a CSS path for it. So what I can do is I can use the select tag, which is select in that case. And over here in CSS, if we have to provide the attribute, what we do is we provide the attribute. In this case, the attribute was name and the value for it was cars. See, so this is the CSS path for this selector. Now if you would compare this with the XPath, you would find that there is no forward slash. We are not using @ sign for the attribute part. So this is one example. Let us write in one more way. Let's write the second CSS path for the same selector. Let's write this select ID equals to cars. So again we were able to find one. Again the attribute equal and then the value for it. Now CSS provides some shortcuts. You don't have to even write this. What you can do is, if you are interested in the ID value for something, what you can do is you can just write hash and then the value after it. So in our case this is cars. So if you see, now it is able to find this element which has ID equals to car, and this is the way to write it. Let's write one more selector using the class attribute. So let's write one. We will write for this div class equals to drop down. So let's copy drop down and let's try to write one. The CSS for this would be div brackets class equals to and then the class name and bracket closed. We were able to find that element using this CSS path. Now there's again a shortcut if you have to work with classes. So all you need to do is you don't require all this. Just remove this also, just place a dot. So what this does is it finds out the class which has this name, which is in our case drop down. So if you would see, this is the one, right? So we were able to find the element using this dot operator which works on the class name. So let's try to generalize the format for writing a CSS path. So the format would be the tag name brackets attribute like ID class and the value after it, and this has to be within single or double quotes. So similar to hash and dot symbol, we do have other symbols also which provide us different capabilities. We'll discuss them one by one. But first, let's take some more examples to write CSS path. So let's say that there is a need that we want to use multiple attributes to write a CSS path. How we can do that? So we can use this format. Like we can just keep appending new attributes in the CSS path. Let's see one example of it. Let's write a CSS path for this input tag. So we have input value here. So what we'll do is we'll do input ID equals to and then the value within it. So we were able to find this one, but let's add one more attribute to be very sure. So let's write type the next attribute in the line and the value as text, right? So this is how you can use multiple attributes to uniquely identify any of the elements. Let me show you one more special case where an element has more than one class and we want to make use of some of those classes to write in CSS path. For example, let's see here. You see a div tag which has a class attribute and it has so many values separated via spaces. So these are all different classes. So content would be one class, block is another class and all that. And this div tag works. This div tag has all these classes within this element. Let's see that we want to locate this element. How we can do it using the multiple classes names. Let's write that. So as we learned that we can use dot operator to provide the class names. So let's write the first class name. So this is content, right? The another class which I remembered was panel. The another class was block. So with this we are able to find some of the elements. Although we have four such elements which meets this requirement, but you get the idea, right? If we have multiple classes within the element and we want to make use of those, we can write them via dot operator, which signifies the class name, then the class name, and then keep appending the class names using the same approach. So in cases where we require multiple classes, we can use such format. Next, let's discuss about different ways or different situations where we may require to work on this value of an attribute, which in our case is text, and there are certain situations where we may have to use these special operators. So let's do it one by one. So for example, I've written this CSS path. We have a div tag and then we are using the class attribute and a name for it. You would see that we are not able to find anything, right? It says 0 of 0. But we do have some classes here which include this content word within their class value. Now let's say that we don't know the other names, but we do know that the element has this content class name. So please fetch me those elements. So how do you get that? You can use these operator. You can use a partial attribute value, which is asterisk in this case. So how to use it? We can just, after the class name, we have to provide asterisk. You see, now it is showing 1 of 6. Let's see those values. So first is here, right? Now it shows div class page content. Now you can see, right? What it says is like, get me those elements which have the value content within the complete value for this attribute. So in this first element over here, you can see it says page hyphen content. So it does include that content text within the value. So that is why it is returning us that value. If we move ahead, second value, you can check. It again has the content keyword there, and it does have other values also. But because of this asterisk sign, it is returning us that element. And similarly, the other elements will be shown. The next case could be where you would be needing the elements which have class in the beginning of the class value. So not in between, not in the end, but the class value should start with content. How to write the CSS path for it? So for that, we can make use of this caret sign. Now you would see that it is returning us only those elements where the class name is starting with content. So this is the one, right? Content here, starting with content. The second also, and so on. Similar to this, there could be a case where we need the content keyword to be in the end of the class values. So what we can do is, there is an operator for it, and that operator is $sign. Let's see what all values we get. So the first value is this, page hyphen content. So content is in the end. So another one, drop down content. So content is in the end of the value. Now the next case, this I. So these values over here, right, are case sensitive. Now we can find some elements using this CSS path. Let's change the C to capital C. You would find that it is unable to find now, right? But you don't care whether it is a small c or capital C, but you still need those elements. So what you can do in that case is, you can place an I after this, and here it works as ignore case. So you can place an I which will ignore the case sensitive part. Now you are able to search these elements again which have the content as the suffix, or they are placed in the end, and we are also ignoring the case sensitive part. So you can use all four, not only just with classes, but any other attribute you have. Now let's talk about the HTML tree hierarchy. So as we have discussed in case of XPath also, our HTML DOM follows a tree structure. So you have an HTML, you have an head, and then after that you have a body tag and other tags within it. With XPath, you had the capability of moving from top to bottom, parent to child, and in the reverse order also. like from child to parent. But in case of CSS, it only runs in one direction. So we can write a CSS path from parent to child. It is not the other way around. Now let's try to see what all capabilities CSS path provides us if we want to move from a one node to another using this hierarchical structure. So let's say that we want to write an XPath for this submit button. So let's inspect this first and let's see that what is the hierarchy structure. So you can see that this input tag is placed under this user form tag. So what we can do is, let's try to write this. So we'll copy this user form. We will do a dot and this is a class name. So we will use user form here. So we reached here. Now let's see that where we wanted to reach. We wanted to reach to this input, right? Where the value is submit. Now the way to write the CSS path which follows a certain hierarchy, what we can do is we have to add a space. Once you add the space, then you can write the CSS path for the element you want to be at. So in this case, we want to be here at input value submit. So let's try to write this. So we'll use input and use value, which is submit. So this is how the hierarchy structure was used by CSS using the space between these two CSS paths. Let's look at some other options also. So now what we'll do is we will write a CSS path again for this drop down here. So we go here. Now you see, right, we have different options here which are like siblings to each other. So let's try to write a CSS path for this option value. Now let's say that we want to find the immediate sibling of it. So who is the immediate sibling? The immediate sibling to this is this value, option value equals to sub. So what we can do is we have to use the operator plus and then option here. So with this, it will give the immediate available sibling which matches the CSS path. Now let's say that we want all the following sibling to this option tag. So what we can do is the operator for is to use the tilde sign. So once we write it, we can just mention option and you can see that we are getting 3 elements here. So let's check them, right? So these are all the siblings to this option Volvo element. So let's discuss about child elements more. So with the help of this space between the two CSS paths, we could follow a parent-child relationship, right? But with this, it does not have to be an immediate child. Now let's say that we have a requirement that we want the immediate child of an CSS of an element. So how to write that? So what we can do for that is, let's say that we are here, right? I've written a CSS path for this form tag, and over here I want this immediate child of it. So we can see this form tag has multiple modules within it. So this is the one which is the immediate child, but there are other div tags within it which we are not interested in currently. So what we can do for this is the operator to write for immediate child is this angular sign. So after this, if you write div here, it will move to the immediate child which matches to this CSS path. So over here within the form, the immediate child is this div. So we are able to reach to this immediate child. So let's talk about indexing now. So let's say that we again reach to that drop down element, and over here we have this select tag within which we have these many option elements. So let's say that we write the CSS path for this select element first, which is this. And now after that, if you want to reach to this option tag, what we have to do is space option. But with this you can see, right, we are getting 4 different elements here, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Now out of these 4, let's say that we want to work only on the first one. So like in case of XPath, we could write the index number after the within the bracket. So similar to that, we have a helper method here using which we can achieve this. So the method is nth child. So after this, you have to provide the index number. So again, index number starts from 1. So if we write 1 here, see, it just points to the first matching child of this CSS path. So the thing to understand is that we are using this helper method. We are providing the index number of that element, and then we also have this colon sign. So colon sign is used so that we can provide a helper method after it. There are some more helper methods. So let's say that like in case of XPath, we had last helper method. Similar to that, we have here the helper method with the name last child. So it is giving us the last child, which is matching this CSS path. So the helper method here is last child. Similar to this, we have the first child. So we can write, now it points to the first element here within the child group. One very important thing about CSS which I wanted to highlight here is that currently there is no way in CSS to write a CSS path where we could make use of this text value which is displayed within the tags, like in case this sub value, opel or audi. So we cannot write a CSS path which requires this text value. So in all those cases, if you have a need, try to use XPath. Although we have an alternative in CSS, but it works on the property inner text. So inner text is a property of an element which could be used where the value gets set to the value you have, to the text which you would have filled in that element. For example, let's say that for this user email, I've typed in the name Akhil here. Let's see the element for this. So over here you will see that we have this input tag, right? There is no attribute with the name inner text. Let's try to first write the CSS path for this. So we need this user ID, hash and user ID. So we are able to reach to this input tag. Now here we don't see the inner text property or the attribute here. Let's try to use it via JavaScript first. So we'll go into the console tab and we have this document.query selector and we have provided the CSS path for it. And after that, if we type inner text, right, you can see it is returning us no value. So this is blank. Even if I have written the name Akhil here. Let's say that it had the value of Akhil here. Then we could have used the CSS path, and the way to write CSS path for that would be after the CSS path we have to mention contains and the value of the text we expect it to have. So this is how you could have written the CSS path for the inner text property. But you can't write a CSS path exclusively for the text which is available within those texts. So this is all I have to share about the CSS path, and this is all you need to write the CSS path now. So use the knowledge and use all these operators which I have explained one by one to write a CSS path for your application. The only way to master it is to practice. So please practice CSS path and XPath on your applications using the concepts which I have shared today and on the Day 2 XPath Masterclass session. I hope you enjoyed the session today and would have learned something new. If you did, please subscribe the channel and do share the content with others as well.